Well, warm welcome to this talk. Now, this talk is basically a long interview with Dr. Tim Kelly, who's no stranger to the channel. But Tim's given us basically a long form interview. It's well over an hour, so it's for the more serious listener. But it deals with some really pivotal issues. And as well as that, Tim has given us the essay to download that you can download freely, the essay that this is based on. This is it here. I've provided the link. You can download it completely free. And we'll see it's in three parts. Surveying the wreckage. That's the wreckage of the recent pandemic debacles, particularly. He then talks about examining root causes. And he then explores solutions. Now, it's particularly interesting because Tim is a systems analyst. He trained as a systems analyst, graduated in that, and then he trained as a doctor. And since then, he's worked on A&E as an A&E doctor, accidents and emergency department doctor. For quite some time, he's highly experienced in that. And the good thing about A&E is, I've worked on A&E myself, you get experience of a wide variety of different things. So you'll get some trauma, you'll get some surgery, you'll get some eye problems, some ENT, some medical problems, some paediatric problems. You get a wide range of issues. And combining that with Tim's systems analyst brain and way of thinking, he synergized his medicines with his systems analyst way of thinking and comes up with really quite interesting ideas. For example, he sees a lot of analogies between the way that there is what you might call pathology in wider society, in global society, in fact, global systems, and the way that the human body actually goes wrong. It really brings a refreshing perspective to that. And because Tim is basically a generalist, he doesn't get bogged down in the detail. Very often these days in medicine especially, people are very specialised in a particular thing and they lose sight of the big picture. So to lose sight of the big picture means very often to lose sight of a lot of common sense. So packed full of really good stuff here from Tim. I do butt in with some relatively uninformed comments from time to time, but if you can tolerate that, an excellent presentation. It is for the serious viewer, as we've said. It lasts for about an hour and 9 minutes, but well worth it. Let's dive in. Welcome to this video, and today we have with us Dr. Tim Kelly. Tim, thank you for coming.
Thanks a lot, John, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
What are you here for? Tell us about yourself and why you're here.
Well, I'm a doctor. Before that, I was a systems analyst. Well, I still am a systems analyst, really. I think I wear the sort of systems analyst glasses all the time, looking at systems. And I'm concerned. I'm concerned about the systems in our world at the moment. That's one of the reasons I'm here, just to talk to you about that and give you a different perspective, I suppose, on some of the things that have been happening the last few years.
So in a sense, you're looking at medicine, and from that you've extrapolated to larger systems, but you're doing it with a medical brain, but with a systems analyst hat on.
Exactly.
So you're kind of synergizing these two disciplines.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, because the human body's a system, but then so is the planet. The planet's a big system too, and everything is interconnected. And what I've seen as I've studied medicine is that a lot of the patterns that we see in disease in the body, in the human body, we see them at societal level. And that's something I've been very interested about, and sort of looking at seeing if we can diagnose societal disease. And so I've written an essay about that, and I sent that to you, and you were interested. And
strangely enough, I've got it in front of me. It is really crisp, and viewers can download this. We'll put the links for that. So just tell us what a systems analyst is first, Tim, for those of us, including me, that aren't that sure.
So yeah, my first degree was computer science, and I suppose what I've always been good at is going in and looking at a system and then assessing the problems and how a system works and what might go wrong with it.
Yeah.
And then I became a doctor, and the body's a system, and that's a very diagnostic thing too. So I think the two things work quite well together, actually. But I think I have a very different perspective than a lot of doctors would, just because of the way that medical school works. Going into medical school with this way of looking at a problem, I see things from different angles. And I think it might just be useful to have a different perspective.
Yeah, and the fact that you're older, I mean, when you go in when you're 18, I mean, when I was 18, I started working in a psychiatric hospital, and you do become conformed to that environment. The total institution phenomena is real, whatever field people are in.
Exactly. So if you go into something with a different perspective, you actually might see the whole system completely differently than someone who's just come in straight from school.
Yep. And the essay basically is about the root causes of societal disease. So that's what we're kind of unpicking in this.
Yeah.
In this talk. Now, your introduction, you've talked about a breakdown in critical thinking, breakdown in ethics, and a breakdown in rational decision making.
Yeah.
What's on your mind there? And are these things interconnected? The lack of critical thinking, the lack of ethics, the lack of rational decision making? And then what examples are you thinking about there?
Well, it feels to me like we've abandoned a lot of the principles that we're meant to uphold at the last few years. I'm thinking of the COVID era, and the essay title is called Beyond Blame, because I'm quite dissatisfied with a lot of people's explanations of what's happened during the COVID era. And what's happening around the world at the moment. A lot of ideas of conspiracy, which I can understand that, and then there's going to be people who have agendas that aren't good, but we have to look beyond that and think about, at a systems level, what are the things that make us vulnerable? Let's say those people were there. How would they take advantage of what mechanisms could they take advantage of? And really having a think about what exactly is disease as well. Because everything's so interconnected that the biological disease that we see in the hospital actually might relate to some algorithm on some social media network somewhere, which has allowed told them to behave a certain way. So there's not really a place where one system stops and another one starts, because everything's so interconnected.
One molds into the next, and is interlaced. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the first point, surveying the wreckage.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
Surveying the wreckage. So what I'm trying to do here, I've split the essay into 3 parts.
Yeah.
So the first part, surveying the wreckage, which looks at the COVID era really, and just sees how big a blunder have we made.
Yeah.
And then the second part would be then, well, what are the root causes? What took us there? And then the third part is, how do we fix it, essentially? So it's 3 parts. Good. So surveying the wreckage, what I'm doing really is just giving us some bottom lines of the mess we're in. I mean, we've squandered hundreds of billions away on measures, which were pseudoscientific. Yep. I'm talking about lockdowns, tracking and tracing, highly contagious respiratory virus. There's no evidence that that's going to do anything useful. And we've spent an absolute fortune on this stuff. And we've transferred trillions of dollars from the poorest to the most wealthiest in the process.
There's been a massive wealth transfer, hasn't there?
Massive wealth transfer. This burden's going to be around our necks for many years to come. And we were seeing at the moment with this, the politicians arguing about the fuel money for the pensioners.
Yep.
I mean, this is a drop in the ocean to what they were spending.
It's peanuts.
Absolute peanuts. They were just burning money like you wouldn't know what, and it's borrowed money too.
Yeah.
So we've got this burden around our children's necks, basically. They're going to be paying for all that. But it's not just a financial burden, educational burden as well. And then on top of that, we had a complete abandonment of medical ethics, where young, healthy people were coerced to take products, these so-called vaccines, which are, quite frankly, are not, I mean, they've been purported to be safe and effective, but I don't see how any products can be labeled this way, especially that one, because we've seen reanalysis of randomized controlled data by Joseph Frayman. Joseph Frayman.
He's been on the channel a couple of times.
Yeah, I mean, he's an amazing doctor in Louisiana. And the fact that we're relying on doctors from the swamp to actually do the job that the authorities are meant to be doing. But he's looked at the randomized control data, 1 in 800 risk of serious injury from taking these mRNA products. And when you then scale that up
Oh,
to the amount of doses that have been
the
given.
global rollout. I mean, you talk about tangible harms.
Tangible. I mean, yeah. So that is a tangible harm. You've basically injured millions of people in that process. Most of them at very, very little risk from this respiratory virus. If you were young and healthy, the risk was negligible.
Yeah.
The risk of flu would be higher, actually, or at least comparable in a young, healthy person.
Yeah.
So there's no reason whatsoever
Yeah.
to coerce people to take these products. And of course, the argument at the time would have been, oh, well, it's just to prevent the spread, to protect the elderly. Well, it would be unethical to do that anyway, but we know that it doesn't
work either.
It doesn't stop transmission either. So
it's unethical, and it didn't work.
Exactly. And I mean, just to sort of, as a quote I put in the essay, where I spoke to a doctor who had just seen a patient who had a severe reaction from one of these vaccines. It was the AstraZeneca, and the patient had one of these clots.
Yeah.
And died, actually. And the doctor said to me, well, it's the price we have to pay to keep everybody safe.
Yeah, that is...
I mean...
What a way... it distresses me that doctors would be thinking like that.
Well, it just... And that sort of sums up the era, doesn't it? How can you keep everybody safe if some people are going to be injured by the thing? So the whole point of medicine is that it's a risk benefit, basically.
Yeah. At the level of the individual, it's not utilitarian.
Yeah, well...
Well,
exactly.
It shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be. Yeah. It shouldn't be.
Yeah.
But even if it was, even if you were just looking at a population level, then it still wouldn't work anyway. It's not stopping transmission. And there's no reason to think that it would stop transmission when you understand how these products work. I mean, the fact that we didn't do proper randomized controlled trials, and the trials were then torpedoed, I think is the term Dr. Malhotra has used, which I think is a pretty accurate description of what happened. When you give the control group the actual product.
Yeah.
So we don't know, we'll never know really.
Eradicating the possibility of longer term follow-up.
Yeah, we will never know 100% the damage that these products have caused.
Yeah.
Because observational data is all we can rely on now.
Yeah.
And observational data has got a lot of confounding variables, so we're never going to get to the bottom of that. Indeed. But anyway, I'm just surveying the wreckage. So that section of the essay really is really showing how far we have strayed.
Yeah.
And it sort of justifies the next part of the essay is, how on earth did we get there?
Yeah. Let's just unpick it a little bit further, because we've got plenty of time today. You've got the inverted belief paradigm.
Yes.
I think that's what you've just talked about, isn't it?
Yeah. So
everything's upside down.
Yeah, everything's upside down. So in the essay, what I talk about is tangible harms and then untangible harms.
Yeah.
So the tangible harms would be the money that we've wasted, the educational losses, and the actual injuries.
Yeah.
Then the untangible harms is what I'm talking about there is the psychological effect that this has had on the population, essentially. Mm-hmm. Because, I mean, what we've done really is it's like almost like a psychosis, but it's
a mass.
The people have used the term mass
madness of crowds.
Yeah, madness of crowds, that kind of thing. Yeah. I don't actually like the term psychosis because it's
got a very specific medical meaning.
It's got a very specific medical meaning. But I suppose when you have a belief, when you've got a society that's strayed from reality to this sort of belief system of very narrow thinking of things like safe and effective. It's like a
the false dichotomy you were talking about.
Yeah, it's like a hypnosis almost. Yeah. You know, of trying to reduce complex problems into these little sound bites. Nobody is safe until everybody is safe. Nobody is safe until everyone is safe.
What does that even mean?
What does it? It's impossible, isn't it? It's totally impossible. Yeah. So these are the intangible harms, which you can't actually physically see, but they're still there under the surface. And we need to understand what's happened there, because you've got, I think a lot of people are in denial now of what happened. And I think it would be very dangerous to sweep all this under the rug and say, oh, it was a bit of a panic. We might learn a few things. No, we have to go through this with a tough comb and work out exactly what went wrong, because the next time some perceived crisis comes along, we will need to have learnt from the lesson, hopefully.
You know, in a sense, maybe psychosis isn't such a bad term, because my simple definition of psychosis is a detachment from reality. A psychotic is not in the real world, he's living in his own world. So maybe it's not such a bad term after all. And then you've got the underappreciated mechanisms of long-term harm.
Yeah, exactly. Underappreciated long-term harm. So the way that these products work, I mean, I think a lot of doctors would, if a patient came in with a problem into the hospital, they would, and they'd had maybe one of these experimental products, even a week later, they're probably discounting it as too much time has passed. Too much time has passed. A month.
The cause and effect link has gone from the medical brain.
Yeah, it's gone from the medical brain. They just wouldn't think that a product like a vaccine could cause a product a week later, let alone a month later or 6 months later. How would that be? And a lot of the reason for that is that there's a misappreciation of how these products work. And if you cause inflammation in the body or cell damage, you might not see the downstream consequences for some time. And I'll give you an example of that. I'm just going to this is hypothetical. I don't want to scare people who've taken these products, okay? Because we're still talking numbers where on an individual basis, the risk is probably low. I mean, Joseph Freeman's paper was showing serious harm in 1 in 800 people. Yeah. But when it's when you look at it on a population level, you realise that this is a really big problem because we've got millions of people affected. Yeah. So I don't want to scare people who have taken the products. I just want to make that absolutely clear. But you have this product. It's got a lipid nanoparticle in it. I'm talking about the mRNA jabs now. Yeah. And then your body is going to produce foreign protein in cells that can't necessarily regenerate. So, for example, the heart. Yeah. And so you might have some silent myocarditis when you take the product. We know that there's a troponin rise in a certain number of patients. It's quite high.
Quite a big percentage.
Yeah, I think it's 1 in 30, I think.
I think it's around about that numbers.
Yeah, 1 in 30. I mean, to think that there's a significant troponin rise in 1 in 30 patients.
And we should say that troponins are a marker that's measured in the blood that indicates damage to the myocardial cells.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So if you've got damage to the myocardial cells, that's not good news because the heart doesn't repair itself very easily and the brain doesn't repair itself very easily either. So, I mean, if you took one of these products and let's just say hypothetically, someone took this product and it killed a certain number of their brain cells, however many thousand brain cells, you wouldn't know straight away. It wouldn't be until much later in their life that maybe they just get their dementia a few months earlier or something like that. This is hypothetical, but what I'm trying to say is that
we simply don't know.
We simply don't know, and we don't. The only way we can tell in medicine is to have long-term studies. Yeah, and this really brings us to the heart of the matter. Yeah. Is that people were told that it's safe and effective in the absence of long-term studies. Well, you can't know that because you haven't got a randomized controlled trial, which has got the length that you need. The only you need the main ingredient, which is time, to be able to tell if something is safe.
And there's plenty of precedents for this in medicine, isn't there? So you could be exposed to a toxin, for example, that destroys some of the cells in the substantia nigra that make the dopamine, maybe half of them. Yeah. Then you get Parkinson's disease at 50 instead of at 80 or something. So,
exactly.
There's a lot of, and this is the mistake I made personally, I think, in my thinking at the early stages of this. I couldn't conceptualize that for want of a better term, vaccine could cause long-term damage. I was always thinking about the immediate effects. And now that this has become apparent and obvious, I can't quite work out why I didn't realise that, but many of us didn't. And
I mean, there's multiple mechanisms. I mean, one of the mechanisms that Dr. Malhotra, esteemed cardiologist, has pointed out is that you might get inflammation of the coronary arteries, and then and so that maybe you have your heart attack earlier than you would have had it, because you've had that build-up of plaque earlier. Now, you're not going to detect that. You're not going to detect it in a clinical trial either, and not a short-term clinical trial. And there's so many mechanisms of harm for this drug because it goes everywhere. So it can go to any organ, It could affect the immune system.
It does. We know it goes everywhere. It goes to your toes. It goes to your ears. Every organ in the body. There's systemic distribution of these minuscule lipid nanoparticles.
Yeah.
And we were told they weren't, but they do. We know they're systemically distributed.
And what's incredible as well is that, I mean, for the mRNA products, is that there was a randomized clinical control trial, but it was shut down early. Just by the way, when it was starting to show significant harm, suddenly it gets stopped. You can make of that what you want. And
the argument,
the argument that was made was, it's unethical not to give the control group this because this deadly virus is going to kill. Well, actually,
viewers will have their own view on that.
Yeah, the viewers can have their own view on that.
Let's move on to the next of your 3 points. So the essays in 3 points. Examining the root causes. That's your second part of the essay, as if there's root causes of this issue. What root causes are you thinking of?
Right, so root causes. How on earth did we get here, John?
Yeah.
How have you thought about this before you? Can I ask you what were your thoughts
about how we got here
before you read the essay? Can you try
before I read the essay, looking back, I can now see in the clear white light of the retrospectoscope, looking back, that there was more control of my thinking than I realised. That there was more control of the agenda than I realised, that more people were subject to a particular narrative from mainstream media that really didn't allow much dissent, that dissent was somewhat ridiculed and poo-pooed, and if you dissented you were somehow some weird conspiracy theorist. And that has all been exacerbated by the pandemic. But the good thing to me about the pandemic and the whole vaccine debacle and all this stuff is that for me personally, it's given me a clarity of thought that I didn't have before. You might almost say a cynicism, but I think it's good because the whole point of science and the whole point of rational thinking is that it relates to reality. Now, if the nature of the world is this control agenda, if there are these narratives, if there is this overt and covert manipulation of the population, then it's better to know about it than not know about it.
Yeah. Okay. So what I've tried to do is set aside the idea that there's a particular entity that's in control and being sort of pulling the strings.
Yeah, okay? We're not talking about a James Bond villain here.
Yeah, so I'm leaving the idea open.
Yeah.
But I'm saying even if there was that person or entity and they've got an agenda and they're trying to do something, and some people have jumped on that sort of idea that for it to be so insane, there has to be a big conspiracy. Okay. Yeah. So what I've tried to do is look at the forces that the structure of our society and what could they take advantage of. And could this arrive naturally just from a sort of cock up, or it doesn't matter whether it's a cock up or conspiracy. The same frailties of the system would still have to be present.
Because the bad guys are going to take advantage of whatever they can find to take advantage of.
So what I've tried to do is look at our whole system and look at what are the frailties here, and actually what I see is that a lot of the things that happen in biological disease in our body are playing out. If you imagine you zoomed out of the planet and you look at the sort of craziness that's gone on over the period, a lot of the same phenomena happen. And I'll give you an example. If you get say a cancer, okay, what will happen is your immune system will basically be tricked to attack itself rather than attack the cancer, okay? And you see that where skeptical scientists that are going against the narrative are effectively, they're attacked by the people that should be upholding the rule of ethics and law, basically. So so when you actually start looking at it in more detail, you realize that a lot of the same principles are playing out at a sort of a zoomed out level on the planet.
It's almost like a sort of fractal thing, isn't it? You know, what's true on the small scale can be true on the larger scale, can be true on the macro scale.
Yeah, exactly. So the same things are happening. So another example in that, when a cancer goes to organs of the body, that's kind of what's happened at a societal level. Organizations that are supposed to keep us safe can no longer be trusted because effectively this cancer has got everywhere.
Yeah.
So what I've been trying to do with this essay is, because I've sort of been thinking about this in terms of a societal, initially I was thinking of it as a societal disease, but I've actually come to the conclusion we're actually looking at a societal cancer. So I'm looking at what are the ingredients of this cancer, and it's only by understanding the ingredients that we can begin to understand how we might get ourselves out of this mess.
You talk about hyper-specialization. What does that mean, and is it a problem?
So hyper-specialization and centralization are what I call the two key structural drivers of what is causing this mess that we're in at the moment. There's also cultural factors, and there's dynamic processes as well. So when it comes to hyper-specialization, so family members have said to me, Tim, if you're right, we've made this terrible mess, and it wasn't safe and effective, and lockdowns don't work, we shouldn't be doing that. Too many people would have had to be in on it. Too many doctors would have to be on it. This is ridiculous. It would be a big conspiracy, and it's far too many people have to be.
It'd have to leak somewhere. Someone would leak.
Yeah, someone would. There would have to be too many people in on it.
Yeah.
Okay. So wrong. Okay. Because it's not that doctors are in on it, it's that they're out of it.
Yeah.
Now, what I mean by that is that we have created a system of specialization where it's virtually nobody's responsibility to look at the big picture. Most doctors are just firefighting the immediate problem that is in front of them, and they're so exhausted that when they get home, they just want to have the tea and get on with their lives. They don't want to go and look at the half-life of pseudouridine but to see that it probably isn't a good idea to put it in some vaccine product that they're injecting people in the day.
Which, of course, they did.
Exactly. So what they're doing is they're relying on trust.
Yeah.
And so what we've got now is a system where a handful of people are deciding whether things are safe and effective, for example, or whether we should be doing lockdowns or whatever. And then an entire profession is just following these people.
Because that's what we do at work these days. If a new condition comes in, you don't think, oh, what did I learn in medical school about that? You look at the guidelines. What does NICE say about it? You follow the guidelines.
You follow the guidelines. And that's what's happening in medicine, is that there's basically a complete lack of critical thinking, which is the road that we've been going down, to more protocol-based medicine. And what this does is I talk about in the essay that people can then shelter in their speciality. Okay, so when it's becoming transparent that actually these were bad ideas, what people can do is they can take refuge in their speciality. If you're a knee surgeon, you just keep on doing your knees. Well, okay, well, it might not be so, but it's not really my problem. So because I just do knees, or I'm dealing with this problem or that problem. It's nobody's responsibility. So we basically have a situation of ethical blindness, where the majority of the people working in mainstream healthcare, it's just not their responsibility to look at these issues.
Principle of deferred responsibility. It's classic in psychology.
Exactly. So where you've got this really siloing of knowledge and siloing of responsibility, siloing of ethics. And that's not good. And it's going to get worse, by the way. It's going to get worse.
There's a famous case in psychology, the murder of Kitty. So Kitty was murdered, I think it was in New York, probably back in the 40s or 50s. And later on, the police found that several hundred people had heard her scream, but everyone thought someone else would report it. No, it's quite tragic.
So hyper-specialization, that's the first structural cause that I identified. That is the problem.
You've got cogs in a machine and tunnel vision, chilling willful blindness through separation of concerns, and chilling effect of silencing dissent.
This problem with separation of concerns, it doesn't just apply to COVID. If I can emphasize that this actually applies to the entire medical paradigm, actually.
And beyond, I would argue.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not. Yeah, it's not just medical paralysis, but you can. I mean, the history is littered with cases where essentially the big machine itself is actually not good. It's quite a bad machine, but the individual people in it are good people.
Yeah.
But they're just doing. When you take each person's little task, it looks fine on its own. But the actual machine, when you see what the actual machine is doing on a grander scale, it's not good. And essentially, I mean, what the health services really come to now is it's a sick service, not a health service.
Correct.
It's a sick service where we're firefighting disease that has no right to exist in the first place in many, many cases. And there's not really any incentive to actually get to the root causes of the problems. Instead, we just we gloss over, and that's what a lot of pharmaceuticals for at least chronic conditions do.
Yeah. I like your term cognitive contagion. That's
cognitive contagion.
That's a nice turn of phrase. So I think what you're saying there is that abnormal thinking spreads.
Yeah, abnormal thinking spreads.
Transmissible disease.
Yeah, exactly. Well, should we talk about the centralisation first?
Yeah, go for centralisation,
So centralisation would be the second structural component of the problems that we're seeing, okay? Now, the centralisation takes is seen in many forms, okay? We've got like top-down decision-making. Now, we saw that with COVID, where literally there was just the cabinet were making the decisions and everything was just flowing down street like a pyramid. So like, right, everyone's got to wear a mask and the entire country is wearing masks. So one minute they don't do anything, and the next minute they decide that it's going to be one of the key planks of how we're going to control the thing, and everybody has to wear a mask now. So that's one form of centralisation. But there's other forms of centralisation as well. When we look at how our educational systems are financed, a lot of pharma influence there. A lot of when you look at funding biases and things like vested interest, essentially, and then you look at organisations like the World Health Organization, which effectively, again, you've got centralisation there, and the other thing is when you look at companies, you see that they're actually often owned now by the same big corporate entities, these wealth funds, and effectively there's not competition between them so much anymore, and then they often also own the news channels. So this is all a form of centralisation too. And there's another form of centralisation, and that's trusted forms of centralisation, where you take something like the BBC, when they formed this trusted news initiative with the other with the other news networks. Effectively, you don't have independent news networks really, because they're all linked together with this trusted news initiative. So they when one says one thing, then you see all the others doing the same thing, and they're not allowed to talk about certain topics. So it's the mRNA, you won't see that on the mainstream.
Quite a few topics. Corporate capture and regulatory capture. You've summarised that quite nicely there. Conflicts of interest and funding bias. Again, you've summed that up. Media influence and communication platforms. Again, and we see the constant attempts to control communication platforms. I've had videos censored recently, and certain media platforms are way worse at it than others. It's incredible, and so that's another form of centralisation too, really. If you're censoring the dissenters, then all you've got left is the centralised voice of authority from he who is on high.
I mean, the thing about these social media platforms is it's a form of centralisation, because you've got a single it's just a small group of people controlling the algorithms, essentially.
Broader cultural context.
Yes.
I think it's important. You mentioned identity politics, controversial issue, obviously.
Yeah, and so there was a lot of that going on during the COVID year. My wife's American, actually, so I keep an eye on American politics. It was actually even stronger over there, wasn't it? Where basically, like, it's just a bad idea to mix medical things with politics. It's not going to work out well, is it? And that's pretty much what happened. You see a very big divide in America between what your positions are on these a lot of these topics, depending on what party you're
indeed, which seemed completely non-overlapping magisteria to me, but but it often is the case. My view is, for this channel anyway, I'm happy to mention politics because it impacts on people's health, and it does.
Yeah,
it massively does. Who the heck was Thomas Malthus?
So
Malthusian perspectives.
Well, he was a bit of a pessimist, really, and focused a lot on
early Victorian.
He was worried about resources.
Yeah,
and it was quite a pessimistic outlook, really.
That the population will grow until it runs out of a resource, then the population can collapse.
So there was. I think there's this pessimism that's been running throughout the era, really, and I'm actually optimistic. But I fight that with my sort of realism as well, of like where we are at the moment.
We're desperate to be optimistic.
Yes. I'm desperate to, exactly.
Yeah, but actually I'm not too optimistic.
You're not too optimistic?
No, I'm afraid not.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping that we'll learn from this. But I've got my fingers crossed.
Today we're trying to.
Well, the reason I'm here is for my children.
Yeah.
You know? If what people have got to realize is that if we don't start speaking out and dealing with these problems that I'm highlighting, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse, and the system will collapse. It will collapse.
Yeah.
And
in the meantime, the hypocrisy and the chaos and the duplicity will increase.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. What do you mean by scientism? What is scientism?
Scientism. Oh, so well, it's anti-science, isn't it? Because the whole point of science is that you're meant to be able to question it.
Yeah.
So what I talk about in the essay actually is the God-shaped hole left by, human beings are probably designed to believe in something, okay?
Yes.
Believe in something. Now,
They always have.
Yes, and what we've had is, as organised religions have kind of become less popular...
At least in the West, in our progressive, secular... scientific, clear-thinking societies, if you want to believe that.
Well, and so I've kind of almost come full circle on this, right? I was brought up as a Christian, and I went to church every week, and I learned a lot of stuff in the Bible. And then in my early 20s, I started questioning a lot of these things, and I rejected organised religion. Okay, and I took an almost Richard Dawkins view of religion. I don't know if you know much about Richard Dawkins.
Yeah, basically Richard Dawkins would say that all religious beliefs are basically a virus.
Yes,
it's transmitted from one generation to the next.
Yeah, I'm not sure that.
I'm just reporting a position. I don't agree with this position, but that's what I'm reporting.
Exactly. So I mean, I might agree a little bit with that actually, but I've started seeing more recently the importance of believing in something.
Yeah.
Because if you don't believe in, and if you don't have any sort of grounding,
existential belief.
Well, the way I look at it is that we can make an analogy here. Okay, if you sterilize your, if you're over sterile in a biological environment, what that does is it gives soil for weeds to grow, if that makes sense. And what I've come to the conclusion is that
if you over sterilize, you're getting rid of the competitors, and some nasty bug can come up.
Yeah, so basically, if you have a population that's abandoned any spirituality, which is and start thinking
transcendent belief.
Yeah, exactly. What then happens is you've got an empty hole. Yeah. So I call it in the essay. I call it a God-shaped hole.
God should be there, but we've pulled him out.
Now, I don't know if Jonathan got it, but I don't know if you've come across Jonathan Engler.
Yes.
If you've had him on. I mean, he's an amazing guy. He's a barrister and a doctor.
Yeah.
And
how do you do that?
I know. So I actually stole the term off Jonathan with permission.
I think he got it from Billy Graham, actually.
Yeah, he got it from okay, fine, fair enough.
He can correct us on that if he thought of it first.
Well, but I like the idea. Yeah. It makes sense to me.
So what you do is you take belief in God out, and you've got to put something in its place. So you believe in science almost as a religion.
And I think that's what happened. Yeah. People were just...
And science is fallible.
People were just putting on the TV, and the government were putting their scientists in front of them, and you weren't allowed to question them.
No.
And
If you're questioning me, Tim, you're questioning the science.
Exactly. This is the problem.
The absolute fundamental truth of the cosmos is in my hand. The arrogance.
It's the absolute opposite of what science is meant to be.
Totally
You're meant to be able to question
antithesis of science, actually.
So I just think this is one small factor
I agree.
which is part of the problem. So what I've tried to do is think of as many of the factors that could possibly have led us down this dark hole, and that's just one of the ones. And ironically, that doesn't mean I haven't started going to church again, actually, but I've read a lot of religions, and I actually think I do meditation and well, I'm trying to get into yoga as well. But I think it's important that we do something spiritual, whatever it may be. Because if you don't do that, then I think you'll lose your grounding, and I just don't think it's healthy, actually.
I don't think scientism is the answer, but
no, scientism is definitely not the answer.
You've just prompted my thinking for another video, but we'll carry on with this one at the moment. Rise of fact checkers.
Oh yeah, the old fact checker.
Oh.
Now these are the worst.
Anyway, I don't want my views. Tell us yours.
Yeah. So they're the fact checkers. So I'm actually dealing with the fact check. We're writing an article about fact checkers.
Those that possess truth, Tim.
Possess truth, exactly.
Yeah, dear me.
So who's checking the fact checkers? That's the immediate response that comes to me with
who guards the guardians?
Yeah, exactly. Who guards the guardians? I mean, the whole concept. I tell you what, I don't have an issue with one type of fact checker. Okay, and this is the main root of the problem with fact checkers, is that there's a difference between a statement of fact and a statement of opinion.
Yes.
Now, I don't have an issue with there being a concept of a fact checker, and it could probably be automated. If somebody makes a claim that they went to a particular university, for example, and they studied a particular subject, I went to this and I did this, or if you said, oh, actually, Dr. Kelly, you're not a doctor, you didn't go to medical school, I've got proof.
When I was doing my PhD at Oxford University, you can check that, and it's not true.
That is a fact, and I don't have an issue with social media companies saying, right, that's not true. That is actually a fact that's not true.
Low-level cognitive material.
It's black and white stuff that can be checked.
The Battle of Hastings was in 1645.
Exactly.
We can check that.
Yeah, I don't have an issue with that. But what I do have an issue with is when we then try to take that concept and apply it to something which is a complex problem, which doesn't necessarily, even if it had a black and white answer, your definition. So let's take safe and effective, for example, which was, if you said that these products weren't safe and effective, your profile would be shut down.
You'd be fact checked.
You'd be fact checked, wouldn't you? Yeah.
Because the facts are, they are safe and
safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective. That's all we hear, doesn't it?
Say it often enough and you come to believe it.
Exactly. Yeah. I use the term narrative for that. It's spelled a little bit different than narrow-tive, which is like a statement of
a narrow statement.
A narrow statement.
A narrow statement of the narrative.
Yeah, exactly. And just as a simplistic slogan, essentially. So the reason fact checking can't work is because, as we said, who's checking the fact checkers? But then if you look who funds the fact checkers.
Yes.
And not only that,
He who pays the fiddler calls the tune.
There's that.
Allegedly.
And groupthink too. Because it might be that there may be independent fact checkers, but they have their own cognitive biases. Elon Musk is right here. I'm pretty much a fundamental free speech guy. I just think that free speech isn't good, okay? If you cut that, you've got to as a clip, you've got to let me.
We won't take you out of context.
Please don't take you out of context. Free speech isn't good, but there's nothing better. Okay, because as part of free speech, people are going to say things that are incorrect. But there's no other mechanism. This is why the founding fathers of America realized this is why freedom of speech is ingrained in the U.S. Constitution. Is that they understood this. There is no other option than free speech to be able to. That's the only way that we can check facts is by allowing people to give counter arguments. So if you take the counter arguments away, then you're just going to get this reinforcement loop of the narrative, which could be wrong.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have to have divergent opinions, and we have to be free to express it. And history of science is replete with these sorts of ludicrous revolutionary ideas. Maybe the Earth goes round the sun. What a bizarre idea. Maybe the continents move.
Of course. So, I mean, all of the biggest scientific discoveries were made by the fringe, by minorities, who often had a big battle to try and. I mean, some of them were burnt at the stake because they were going.
No, that's not a joke either. Yeah, they were.
They burnt at the stake, and this is going to be the same for all future science too, because the whole definition of sort of scientific advances are that you're basically presenting new knowledge or new perspectives, at least, to the existing paradigm, essentially.
And the other interesting thing that's happened is evidence accumulates and accumulates and accumulates, and the status quo is persisting, and it's sometimes rigorously enforced. So if you have these heretical ideas, you don't get promoted, you don't get the job as an academic. But then all of a sudden, when the evidence becomes overwhelming, as it was with plate tectonics, then virtually overnight, everything changes.
That's interesting as well. So there's a book called Critical Mass that I'd...
that kind of idea.
I don't know if you've ever read that.
No, I haven't, no.
This is why I do have a little bit of optimism, actually, John.
Okay.
Is that we can... At the moment, we might feel that everything's so upside down that how on earth are we going to get out of this mess?
That's kind of where my thinking is at the moment.
Okay, so maybe I can give you a little bit of optimism.
Please, do.
Critical mass tells us that you might think that because you have to sort of wake this many people up, okay?
Yeah.
But that's not how it works. You probably only have to wake up a tiny, tiny number, and then suddenly you get this sort of snowball effect, and boom,
right.
And there's basically a
exponential growth of critical thinking.
Exponential growth of critical thinking, and then a state change happens.
Yeah.
And we're seeing this already. At the start of the whole COVID era, there was suggestion that this virus is made in a lab, for example.
Yes.
And there was just a few people who were saying, no, that's not right.
Yeah.
But now I've struggled to find anyone who doesn't think that it was made in a lab.
I think pretty well everyone does,
everyone knows it was made in a lab. The evidence was there from the beginning.
Yeah.
And
or the function was gained in a lab.
Yeah.
There was ongoing
So what I'm hopeful is that if you have enough of these little mini narratives that flip, then suddenly there's like an overarching narrative that can flip. And I mean, that's why
that helps, actually. I do feel I can relate to that.
So I suppose what I'm really trying to say is that the problem might not be as big as you think it is, because the solution, you might only have to solve a small part of the problem, and the rest of it will be taken care of by itself.
And a return to reality and the nature of the way the world really is. Yeah, absolutely. Over-reliance on modelling, that was a big problem, wasn't it?
Modelling.
And we know about this. There's many things now that rely on modelling.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you a lot about modelling. My first degree was in modelling, or my dissertation for my first degree was computer science, and it was computer modelling of traffic. Okay. And I mean, I learned very quickly that if you've got more than just a couple of variables, a handful of variables, then you can't make predictions very easily about the future. Now, biological systems...
It's called the third body problem, isn't it? When you've just got two... Newtonian mechanics applies very easily to two bodies, but gravitational inverse square. But when you've got three, it gets a bit tricky.
So if you wanted to land a rocket on Mars or something like that, and you wanted to use modelling, I don't have an issue with that, because the formulas are well understood. Okay, there might be various factors, but they can be modelled by a computer.
Well, we know it works.
Yeah,
the solar systems have been explored using those sort of mechanisms.
Exactly. So they're well understood formulas, for example. When you look at biological systems or sociological systems, there is so much complexity that there are too many variables. You just can't do it. And we've got
chaos and emergent behaviours.
Yes, and the cartoon, like when you go to medical school, or when you study these, any subject, what you're basically learning through is a model. Yeah, and it's an oversimplified version of the actual reality.
By definition, we can only learn models to begin with.
Exactly. Yeah. So you try and get a computer to predict ahead. It's just not going to work for things like modelling respiratory viruses, especially in the case of COVID. I mean, they only really modelled what they thought in terms of viral growth. They never modelled what was the consequence of the intervention, the lockdowns. I mean, there are so many millions of variables and consequences.
And how many people are actually susceptible to becoming ill as well,
Exactly.
you know.
So,
or how many people are, I mean, Dr. Claire Craig talks about this, you know, maybe only 15% of people and the whole population were susceptible to infection with a particular viral generation.
So if you take anything from this interview, it would be, if you hear the word modelling, just alarm bell. Alarm bell needs to ring in the brain, whether we're applying it to biological systems or climate or anything really like that. It's only got. It tell you when it's useful is if you want to thrash out a hypothesis. You run a computer program, and then you can actually do some experiments to see whether you were right. That would be a reasonable use of modelling, but that's not what they're using it for. They're using modelling, and then they're basically saying, well, that means they didn't just use it for the intervention. To model like what the harm of the virus could do. They used it to model how well they think their intervention was. So, we saved this many lives with the vaccine because.
Well, that's counterfactual history. You can't possibly know that. You're saying what would have happened if we hadn't done something.
Well, what they often use is observational data, and then extrapolate it using modelling. But observational data is biased usually anyway due to co-founders. And then when you put it through the model, then you're going to introduce more variables. So really the way it works is that if I said to you, oh, John, I want you to model this policy that I've just generated, and you put it through your model, and you're my employee or a contractor for the government, and I've asked you to model this situation. If the model comes out with an answer that's widely off what you were expecting,
I'm not going to do that because you might sack me, Tim.
What were you going to do?
I'm going to tell you what you want to hear.
Exactly. So what will you do? You're going to change your model, right? So we
just tweak it here and there.
Just tweak it here or there, and this looks a bit more like it should be. So, I mean, it's just a complete farce.
Just nonsense.
It's not scientific. It's anti-scientific. They need to stop doing it. And they're used so often now.
Go and get a proper job.
Just get a proper job. It's not scientific at all.
Right, cognitive biases, cognitive dissonance, willful blindness, ethical outsourcing.
Well, we talked about some of those things already with the ethical outsourcing and cognitive dissonance. I suppose with the cognitive dissonance,
that's a kind of a double thing, really, isn't it?
Yeah, what I'm talking about with the cognitive dissonance is that it's just too much for some people to. The reality compared to what we've been told is so different. It's so wide.
The people I've trusted in all my life can't possibly be that wrong.
Yes,
is kind
exactly.
of
So this is an interesting one. What you're talking about there is the leap that would happen in your brain if that's true. If it's not safe and effective, the downstream of accepting that fact is there's so many other things that if that's not correct, then your entire reality has to be questioned.
The entire foundation of trust that I've basically relied on for my security for my whole life has gone.
Exactly. So
and that I think it has gone.
So that's basically very stressful for people to accept.
It's been unpleasant.
So the easiest thing for people to do is look the other way and just try and get on with their lives. But
they were probably right after all. Right?
Exactly.
I'll just go and have a pint now.
Exactly. It'll probably be all right. It's not going to be all right if we don't deal with this problem.
It's not all right. We have to recognise it's not all right.
Exactly. And otherwise we aren't going to get out of this problem.
Yep. Good. So you've got some interesting examples here. Factory farming.
Factory farming. Okay. So I just put
appalling practice.
Yeah, I've always been an animal lover, and this is why I've put this example in. It's not COVID related at all, but it's just an example.
It is and it isn't. But go on.
It's just this idea of ethical outsourcing. Okay.
Yeah.
So if people had to look after, make their own eggs, having their own chickens, they would not keep them in the same conditions that factory farm animals are kept. Okay, even if they're not buying factory farm products.
Just out of common decency, most people would not do that.
Well, they just wouldn't be able to do it. They would. It would be too distressing for them to see the stress that these animals and the lives that they have. But it's about siloing again by basically saying, right, the farmer's job is to do that bit. So there are people who, I mean, I think they're psychopaths, but I could never do this to what they're doing to animals. In America, it's even worse the way they're treating the animals. Yeah. But there are people who are prepared to do these things to animals and treat them that way
because they get paid for it. Yeah.
Exactly. So what happens is when you buy these products, you are outsourcing your ethics to somebody else, and it's exactly what I was talking about earlier. Is through specialization and siloing, we're able to basically push the ethical problem to the side.
Yeah.
And so you have this blindness.
Well, it's a government problem, Tim, isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
The government should have accounted for this, and the government have regulations anyway, so it's probably all right.
Yeah.
The way we rationalise this to ourselves.
Exactly.
We rationalise and we accept the outrageous.
Yeah.
Is what it comes down to.
It's absolutely outrageous what has occurred. Yeah. Absolutely outrageous.
Yeah, and we just simply shouldn't accept that. We have to stop accepting it. It's just...
Yeah.
Now, just before we go on, relative versus absolute risk. You've got a great analogy here. I've always wondered how to explain the difference between relative and absolute risk.
Yeah.
Now, you've got this umbrella that protects people against being struck by lightning.
Yes.
And it's 95% effective. Wow, 95% effective.
Yeah.
But it's not quite that simple, is it? Because that's a relative risk, isn't it?
Exactly. The relative versus absolute risk. So this is being used a lot in pharmacology to try and downplay risk. Where for drugs, essentially.
Make them look safer than they are.
Well, make them look more effective.
Yes.
And also make them look safer.
Yeah.
The examples there, do you want to just read that one?
Consider an umbrella promoted as 95% effective at preventing lightning strikes.
Yeah.
Great invention. Hypothetical, of course. This highlights the benefit in relative terms, making the umbrella appear exceptionally effective. Mm-hmm. However, the actual risk of being struck by lightning is originally about 0.00001, 1 in a million, dropping to 0.00005, 1 in 20 million with the umbrella.
Exactly.
So it's a risk I might have been prepared to take, actually, because it's a pretty small absolute risk to begin with.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The absolute risk reduction is merely 0.0000 0.00095, virtually negligible in practical terms. Yeah. And this is the way that absolute and relative risk is manipulated.
Exactly.
To make us buy products.
Exactly. So they're saying there's a 95% reduction, but the problem is there was virtually no risk in the first place. Yeah. And this was applied to COVID for young and healthy people, basically. Yeah. This is what I'm alluding to.
Who had virtually no risk, so their absolute risk was really, really low. I think that's a good example.
And so it's the way that we frame these ideas. Yeah. It's quite toxic.
Correct. And of course, I'm going to frame it in the way that makes me most money. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you want to frame the benefit a different way, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah, you want to frame the benefit in one way and you want to frame the side effects in a different way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, statisticians are very good at that, which is why we need people that like Professor Fenton who can look at the statistics completely independently. What do you mean by positive feedback loops, Tim?
Now, this is the most important part of the essay, I think.
Yeah.
Because this really gets to what disease is.
Yeah.
Now, any disease that I can think of, it seems to be involving some sort of positive feedback loop, whether it be a bacteria that's growing, multiplying 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. Before you go, you've got a huge number of bacteria, or cancer that's forming. Yep. And we've seen the same thing with societal disease, essentially.
Yep.
So let me give you an example. Yep. The fear loop. Yep. Okay, so you've got a government, an irresponsible government that's frightened the pants off people and said, this terrible thing's coming, we all need to lock down.
Yep.
And then spreading fear. And you saw the posters.
Yep.
It was quite bad what they were doing. So
mainstream media are actually going into intensive care units.
Exactly. So they're putting the fear into people. And then what that does is you've got then the populations at home feeling terrified, and they start demanding more measures to control the problem, and also what that fear also does. The other reason it was very negligent, I think, was that when you put a population in fear, they become more susceptible to illness.
Yes,
because their hormones change such that you're actually more likely to get sick.
And you've got the risk of misattribution.
Yeah,
of symptoms.
Of course.
Oh, I've got a pain. I must be having a heart attack. Yeah.
So then what the population do is they demand more measures, essentially, and then you've got then you've got a loop.
Yeah.
And there's loads of these loops in the COVID era, and it explains so much of what's happened. The other idea of and the other feedback loop I would say is when the government come out with these narratives, like safe and effective, when they broadcast it on the news, they've got to remember that the population that are going to see that message includes people who work for the government. Yeah. So it's a sort of form of self-hypnosis, essentially. Yeah. Yeah. So they're basically telling we've got to tell the population it's safe and effective, even though we know that it might not be quite. But the problem is that you actually hypnotizing the people that are within the government. So you end up with this loop again.
And we actually got doctors who were getting their medical information from mainstream media.
Yeah.
And written by journalists who are bachelors of arts in journalism and actually know virtually nothing about medicine. Yeah. And yet, because it was on the news, we had doctors listening to that saying, "Oh, that must be right. It was on the BBC or it was in whatever." You know, it's a ludicrous situation.
So when we look at like biological cancers, for example, the reason that cancers form is that the self-checking machinery in the DNA essentially has become corrupt.
Yeah.
Okay. And that is the thing that stops positive feedback loops, because basically that's the break. When a cell goes into this uncontrolled division, that's when a cancer forms.
So normally the positive feedback loops would be interrupted.
They would be interrupted.
If you take away that which interrupts the positive feedback loop, the positive feedback loop is spiraling out of control.
Exactly. So what really happened in the COVID era with all the censorship is that effectively anybody who said, "Oh, hang on a minute, that's not right. Maybe we shouldn't be injecting children with this because it's not. We haven't got an intact randomized control trial. Right? Boop. Turn that person off. Turn that person off." Yeah. So what they were doing is remove.
In medical terms, you're closing down the oncosuppressor genes. Yeah, the genes that stop the cancer.
Exactly. So I think in Parliament the opposition, there wasn't much of an opposition anyway, was there? But basically,
individuals.
Yeah. So, or even peer review. I'm not the biggest fan of peer review anyway. But it's the journals weren't doing peer review, and basically every form of negative feedback in the system was turned off during the COVID era,
allowing the positive feedback to go berserk.
It just went absolutely berserk. So we ended up with this huge positive feedback loop, where basically the population were hypnotized by this really narrow set of beliefs, and it was mainly about sort of number of cases. I think it was at the time. People were just obsessed with the number of cases graph, and completely disregarded everything else.
Yeah, and viewers no doubt will be thinking, "Oh, that applies to something else other things that are going on now," and I'm sure they'll give us many examples of the way that this abnormal thinking is.
Yeah, well, what we desperately need is the negative feedback loops to be reactivated, and that's why we're here today.
Yeah,
we're trying to put negative feedback into the system. Say, hang on a minute, what about this? What about this?
Yeah, we are the negative feedback.
I'm happy to be part of the negative feedback system.
We are negative today, absolutely. Yeah. But biopsychosocial interconnections.
Okay, so what I'm saying here is that the positive feedback loops, they don't happen just within a domain. They happen across domains.
Yeah, I think that's what we've been saying, isn't it?
Yeah. Biopsychosocial feedback loops.
Yeah. So if it applies to, say, the COVID era, maybe it applies to any other issue that is currently going on that viewers might want to use as an example.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, third point is, what the heck do we do about this, Tim? Exploring solutions.
Well, the first thing we ought to do is stop doing harm.
Yeah.
And that brings us back to the Hope Accord, really, which is got to stop those injections.
Yep.
And just stop doing the things that we've already identified as are ridiculous.
Yep.
So helping the people who have been harmed already, and then restoring the medical ethics.
Yep.
But how do we do that? Because the problem is those in power seem to be completely hypnotized by this narrative
and don't want to admit they were wrong.
And don't want to admit they've dug themselves in so deeply.
Yeah.
So we have to then
and
think...
this applies to both sides of the political aisle, at least in the UK.
Yeah. Now, you might notice this section of the essay it's not very long. And the reason for that is that if we've learned anything, is that interventions need to be really well thought out. So
Yes.
I've actually put in the essay, look, I'm not even going to write much more on this. I'm going to think about it more.
Yeah.
Because we desperately need to think about our interventions more carefully because they can come with unintended consequences. So I actually, when the first time I wrote the essay, I wrote pages and pages of, we need to do this, we need to do that, we need to do this. And I thought, hang on a minute, I'm actually being a hypocrite here because I haven't really, we need to debate these things first.
Yeah. And establish the evidence base.
Exactly. So I actually deleted about 3 pages of the essay and I said, right, in fact, sometimes it's better not to do anything until you know what you're doing. But one thing for sure, we need more negative feedback in the system.
Yep.
A lot more negative feedback. We need people to understand the complexity of the world.
The nuance.
The nuance. I mean, I have my own podcast now. It's called Nuance Over Narratives. So I'm getting other doctors in. And so if there's anything that we definitely need, it's more negative feedback in the system. And then what that will do is that will help us find the answers for fixing these other problems.
Yep.
But there's a lot of corporate capture in medicine. There's a lot of conflicts and interests, and these need to be addressed. And for now, I've not said how we need to address them. I think we're going to need red teams. And do you know what red team is,
No.
John? So red team is essentially negative feedback, where basically you question policy. We need to be questioning policy more,
and free to do so.
Yeah, and this needs to be at every level of government.
Yes.
There should be, I think, a sort of a shadow red team, health, like the one we have. The chief medical officer. I think there should be a counter chief medical officer that basically looks at every policy and says, well, what about this? Just a minute. Just a minute.
Absolutely. Like an opposition.
It's like an opposition.
Yeah, and then we can come to a synthesis.
I mean, that was the biggest problem in COVID, is there was no opposition, wasn't there? They all just jumped on the bandwagon. It was, that's how the way that groupthink works.
Unfortunately so, yep. And that will lead us to broader solutions. You've written that the lessons of this era are harsh, but they offer an opportunity for profound transformation.
Exactly. So that's the other thing, is that during this whole era, if I've taken anything positive out of it, it's the connections that I've made all around the world.
Indeed.
To critically thinking people who saw through a lot of this stuff. Some of them saw through it immediately.
And many of them in very senior, brilliant academic positions, as well as
I mean, you fell into some of this stuff, didn't you?
Oh yeah.
But and it's that would be something that I've found has been really it's kept me sane, actually.
Absolutely.
But that I've actually made these connections, and I'm hoping that that's formed that little snowball. I'm talking about this snowball that we can hopefully get to try and get out of this mess and return to science reason. But the other thing I would say, though, is that it's made me realize, some people have said to me, oh, this is all new, but I'm not sure that it is. I think a lot of this stuff was long-standing, and COVID was like lifting a rock.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. Looking back, this has obviously been deteriorating for years, if not decades.
Yeah, I'm not sure how long it's been going on for, but it's uncovered a whole lot of problems.
I'd put it back to the 1980s, personally.
Yeah, I mean, it could be even further.
Yeah,
but it's basically shone a light on these problems.
Yeah,
and
which now means we can recognise them.
Exactly.
And stop pretending everything's okay, because it's not okay.
It's definitely not okay.
Yeah.
Definitely not okay.
Yeah, by embracing humility, recognising our shared humanity, and valuing open dialogue, we can forge a path towards a more enlightened future.
Well,
It's a nice piece of writing. Do download it for yourself.
What we have to learn, all we've got, John, is hope that we can learn from the mistakes.
Yeah.
That's all we've got, really.
Yep.
And I do hope that we do learn from the mistakes.
Yep. Dr. Tim Kelly, for now, thank you very much.
Thank you, John.